Church developments in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is the name given to the period which stretches from the 6th century to the end of the 16th century. After the collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, the Church became the dominating influence during the whole period of the Middle Ages. The fall of the Roman Empire. By the beginning of the 5th century, the Roman Empire was weak. Different groups of people living outside the empire began to attack it. In 410, Rome was captured and destroyed by Alaric of Goth. Others attacked and destroyed different parts of the empire. For centuries, Rome had controlled the civilized world. Its fall marked a big change in the history of the world. Jerome, a leading Christian of that period, is said to have wept when he heard the news that the famous city had been captured. The fall of Rome marked the end of an era and created the circumstances for the beginning of the Middle Ages. The unity and order which the Roman Empire had created was replaced by a corresponding unity and order under the Church. The rise of papacy. During the second half of the 4th century, the Church of Rome rapidly became the leading church in the Christian world. However, from a much earlier time, Rome had shown signs of being the natural leader of the church. In the New Testament, we see that Paul was always eager to go to Rome to establish the church in the capital city of the empire. As the church gradually became a Gentile church, he no doubt felt that Rome should be the center of the church. Later, the church at Rome, from an early stage, was very proud of its connection with Peter and Paul, both of whom are thought to have been executed at Rome for their faith. There was no attempt by the Church of Rome to act in a superior way to other churches before the 3rd century. Although it was emerging as a natural leader among the church, it was still regarded as one among equals. From the time of Damascus 382, Bishop of Rome, we find the Church of Rome claiming that its bishop is the leader of the church. From this time on, especially in the western part of the church, the Bishop of Rome began to assume more power. At the Western Synod of Sardica, it was decided that Rome should have supremacy over the other churches. From this time on, Rome began to direct the decision concerning the church. Its authority was accepted better by the western part of the church. The doctrine of Constantine. Much of the authority attributed to the papacy during this period stemmed from a document known as the Doctrine of Constantine. It is stated that the Emperor Constantine ordered all churches to be subject to Pope Sylvester I and successive popes. It also promises the Pope overlordship of the city of Rome and the western half of the empire. This document has since been shown to be a forgery. Gregory the Great, 590 to 604. Perhaps Gregory is the first bishop of Rome who would genuinely claim the title of Pope. He and Leo the Great, Gregory the Seventh, 1073 to 1085, and Innocent the Third, 1198 to 1216, are the 4 bishops of Rome who contributed to making the papal system the strong influence that it has been throughout history. Gregory was born in 540 to rich parents. He followed a brilliant career in politics until 574, when he heard God's call to devote himself to the work of the church. He sold his estates and gave the money to the poor and to the building of 6 monasteries in Cilicia. When he was elected Pope in 590, Gregory set out to establish the authority of the Church of Rome over the whole church. He believed, like Leo the Great, that Matthew 16:18 gave him this authority. He regarded himself as the successor of Peter and the vicar of Christ on earth. His authority was accepted in the western part of the church and also fairly well accepted in the east. Gregory had a deep respect for the scriptures and lived a very devoted spiritual life. He firmly believed that there was no salvation outside the one Catholic Church. He introduced to the church the doctrine of purgatory. He encouraged the use of pictures and images in the church as long as these did not become objects of worship. Changes in the church. As Gregory did so much to establish the authority of the church in Rome and its bishops, it is useful now to look at some of the important changes which began in the church from the time of Gregory. Papal authority. From the time of Gregory, the popes assumed authority over the whole church. Holy Communion. Although at the time of Gregory, Holy Communion was still regarded as a memorial of the death of Christ, the idea was growing that it was a sacrifice. Many believed in the doctrine of the real present, that Christ is present in the elements used at Holy Communion. By 831 AD, the doctrine of transubstantiation was being taught. This is the belief that the bread and wine in the Holy Communion are changed into the body and blood of Jesus when they are consecrated by the priest. This doctrine was officially accepted by the church at the Lateran Council in 1215. Purgatory. The doctrine of purgatory can be tracked back to Augustine. He suggested there probably was a place where the soul of those who died could be purged from sin by fire. It was an idea which was also found in the pagan religion. In 1439, the Roman Church accepted this doctrine as an article of faith. It is stated that after death, the soul went to purgatory where it was purged from sin through severe torments. Prayer for the dead and to the saints. With the growth of belief in purgatory, there was also a new practice of praying for those who were passing through purgatory. This in turn led to the practice of praying to the saints, those who had been outstanding Christians while they were alive. This became an official part of Catholic worship at the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. Adoration of Mary. In the Council of Ephesus in 431, pronounced that Mary was the mother of God. From then on, she was held in a place of great honor and prayers were offered to her. It was believed that she, being the mother of Christ, could ask Jesus to help those who offered prayers through her. Confession. In the early church, those who had committed a serious sin had to confess before their congregation. By the time of Leo the Great, public confession tended to be replaced by private confession. This helped to avoid the embarrassment and problems which public confession tended to arouse. It is not until AD 763 that private confession was commanded by the church. Priesthood. As time went on, the gap between the clergy and the laity grew. The priest was regarded as someone having spiritual gifts which the laity could not have. As Holy Communion came to be regarded as a sacrifice, the priest's work at the altar had an element of magic about it. The altar became the most sacred place in the church. Increasingly, the clergy wore more elaborate robes. These were first introduced by Constantine. It seems that before this time, the clergy wore no distinctive clothing. Therefore, we see how some of the practices found in the modern Roman Catholic Church began and developed. Some of these practices are also found in many of the Protestant churches. Monasticism. We are familiar today with monks and monasteries. Monks are people who feel that God has called them to shut themselves away from many of the things of everyday life and devote themselves to prayer and worship God. They live a life of asceticism. Asceticism is the practice of denying oneself certain things. Perhaps the first true ascetic in the church was Saint Anthony, who was born in Egypt in 251 AD. He gave up his wealth and good job to live in a mountain cave so that he could meditate and worship God. He is regarded as the father of monasticism. Others joined him, and so the first organized monastic community lived together. They shared all that they possessed, and the work involved in living together. They were then known as cenobites, which means having life in common. Later, those who lived in this way were known as monks, meaning as solitary. The first great organizer of monastic communities was Pachomius, 292 to 346, who established a monastery at Tabarnis on an island in the Nile in the Upper Egypt. When Athanasius visited the community soon after its formation. He was welcomed by 3,000 monks singing hymns. This shows the sudden popularity of the movement. By the end of the century, very many similar communities had established in Egypt, and the movement had begun to spread elsewhere. Monasticism developed more slowly in the West than the East. Some important monastic movements. The Benedictine order. This was founded by Benedict of Nursia at Mountain Cassino in Italy 529. The discipline was very strict. The order became popular and very wealthy. However, their early success eventually led to a breakdown of the discipline and order, which made them such a force for good. The Cluniacian movement. This movement was started in France in 910 by a person called Cluny. It was really started to counteract the decline which had affected the Benedictine order. It aimed to free the church from all secular interference and control. It strongly campaigned for the celibacy of all clergy. It soon became a strong and very highly disciplined order and had wide influence. The Cistercians. This order was founded by Sitax of Burgadi. It was founded by people who were disturbed by what happened in the Benedictine order. The order grew to include 700 monasteries, the most famous being the one that was started by Bernard of Clairvaux.